This is the script for group number 1 in the morning, and they're working on episode 9, which is Bust, from the series America, the Story of Us. And this group will be doing their project on April 11th, 2016, and they're focusing on the Great Depression. Our big idea in less than 25 words: to share some information about the economic crises in other countries, Brazil, Russia, and Ecuador, compared with the crises in the United States in the 1930s and in 2008. Be aware that the singular form of the word is crisis, and the plural form is crises. So again, crisis, crises. This is the introduction. Today in ABB TV News, Hernan and Yongju will tell us about the Great Depression of 1929 and its consequences in the United States. Almost 80 years later, there was a new financial crisis. Why and how did it happen? News from all around the world with our correspondents. Mayara and the latest news from Brazil, where they have a political crisis, an economic crisis, and a crisis of confidence. Andrea from Ecuador. The dollar is the new currency. Allah and the ups and downs of the price of oil in Russia. Don't turn your TV off. You won't want to miss our special guest, Mike. From Hartley House to the world, let's welcome Hernan and Yongju. Part 1. This is ABB TV News. Welcome to our program. This is Hernan Sanchez, and I am Yongju Park. The news today is about economic depressions and how they affect the world. Yes, Hernan, the worst depression in modern history was the Great Depression in the 1930s in the United States. Sure, Yongju. In 2008 in the United States, another financial crisis was also a big deal. But what happened, and why did it happen? These are questions that we will try to answer today in our program. In the United States, the Great Depression began soon after the stock market crash on Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929. Wall Street fell into a panic, and millions of investors lost their wealth. The Great Crash triggered the beginning of the 10-year Great Depression that affected all Western industrialized countries. U.S. consumers in the 1930s lost confidence in the market because debt increased so much. But wages also fell and buying power decreased. People lost their houses and ran to banks to withdraw all their balances. Most banks did not have enough money in custody and ran out of money. Eventually, by early 1933, thousands of banks had closed their doors. In the crisis of 2008, everything started with deregulation in the financial sector. Traditionally, it was pretty hard to get a mortgage if you had bad credit or without a steady job, but everything soon changed. The Depression caused major political changes in America. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the presidential election, and he took immediate action to announce a 4-day bank holiday. All banks closed so that Congress could pass reform. Roosevelt sought to reform the financial system, creating the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is called the FDIC, which is also known as is better. creating the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is also known as the FDC, to protect depositors' accounts. He also established the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is called the SEC. Okay. All right. So he established the securities. Maybe you could say abbreviated. He also established the Securities and Exchange Commission, abbreviated as the SEC, to regulate the stock market and prevent abuses of the kind that led to the 1929 crash. In the last crisis, home prices were going up, and investors wanted to buy mortgage-backed securities with a high credit score, AAA, AAA. So the financial sector had to create more mortgages reaching even fewer. Okay? So the financial sector had to create more mortgages reaching even people with poor credit and low income. For sure, these investments were becoming less and less safe all the time. The Depression also resulted in an increase of emigration of people to other countries for the first time in American history. For example, some immigrants went back to their native countries, and some native U.S. citizens went to Canada, Australia, and South Africa. And guess what, Youngju? What? Many people just couldn't pay back their mortgages, which put many houses back in the market for sale. However, there weren't enough buyers. Supply was up, and demand was down, making prices collapse. However, there weren't enough buyers. Supply was up, and demand was down, making prices collapse. So everybody, buyers, bankers, investors, the government, insurance companies, the stock market, etc. Okay. Supply was up and demand was down, making prices collapse. So everybody, buyers, bankers, investors, government, insurance companies, the stock market, etc., lost money. Now the government acted to save the financial sector. Well, now let's try to understand a little bit what is going on in Brazil with our correspondent Mayara. Hi Mayara, can you hear me? Yes, Youngju. Here in Brazil, the situation is complex. Let's go back in time. It's 2009, and Brazil's beloved president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, proclaims the nation's biggest oil discovery, the pre-salt layer, its passport to the future. The 2016 Olympics and the 2014 World Cup are seen as recognition of the important position Brazil has achieved in the world. Fast forward to today, and Brazil's economy is now in a freefall. Economists say it's the worst recession in the last 100 years. Inflation is currently over 10%, and official unemployment reached 9% in 2015. There is less demand from China the past couple of years for Brazil's commodities, like iron ore, sugar, and soybeans. The price of oil is low. Critics say that the current president has badly mismanaged the economy. Add to that the corruption scandal that has affected Petrobras, the state oil company, and the construction sector, and you have a perfect economic storm. The political crisis has two main origins: the popular backlash against the government due to the state of the economy, and a large corruption scandal, the so-called car wash operation. President Dilma Rousseff is facing several attempts to remove her from office. On March 13th, more than 1 million people hit the streets to protest against the government and demand the president's resignation. Separately, her predecessor and mentor, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is the subject of two separate corruption investigations that link him to a massive scandal at the state oil company Petrobras. Lula says he is the victim of a political witch hunt. The car wash operation started last year when a small group of federal prosecutors uncovered a scheme at Petrobras. The way it worked was that construction companies would overcharge Petrobras and then would funnel the extra money into campaign funds and political bribes. The web of corruption the prosecutors uncovered has touched Brazil's highest levels of corporate and political power. The leader of Brazil's lower house of Congress has also been implicated, as have many other senior business and political figures. There is very little hope 2016 will see improvement in this scenario, but if Brazil can fix the political situation at some point, things will start to improve next year. Brazil still has a large domestic market, many innovative industries, and great wealth in the form of natural resources. It just needs to get its house in order to be able to grow again. It's a very turbulent moment in the history of Brazil, and things are changing every day. And now I want to connect with Andrea from Ecuador. Thank you. Hi. Well, the communication is not clear. Hi, Andrea. Are you there? Hi, Hernan. I'm Andrea. Hello? Hello? I think you aren't listening to me. Hello? Hello, everybody. My name is Andrea from Ecuador. The situation in Ecuador was not different. The situation in Ecuador was not different. Our crisis was extremely bad. The elimination of the sucre, which had lost 300% of its value in the 18 months preceding dollarization, created a long-needed sense of financial stability. Ecuador's GDP, growth, domestic. I don't think it's growth. I'm pretty sure it's gross. Gross domestic product. Yeah. Ecuador's GDP, gross domestic product, grew an average of 5% annually from 2000 to 2006, more than double the rate of growth during the 1990s. However, from 2007 to 2009, the average growth rate fell to 3% annually. At the same time, the 3% annual inflation rate seen in the last 10 years shows that the suppression of monetary policy has helped Ecuador become one of the most stable currency regimes in international markets. In contrast to the inflation and devaluation of the 1990s, dollarization has introduced a sense of stability that has directly benefited Ecuadorians. From 2000 to 2006, real family income increased 14%. In the last 4 years, through June 2010, real salaries rose an additional 25%. The urban poor, in particular, have reaped clear gains from the policy. At the time when the government introduced dollarization, in December 2000, 54 of 100 Ecuadorians were living below the poverty level. 6 years later, the National Institute of Statistics and Census of Ecuador reports this figure dropped to 26%. As of December 2009, the urban poverty rate fell to 25%. So they switched their currency to the dollar, which is obviously a secure form of currency. They were also trying to strengthen their bond with the United States, and switching to the dollar would make it easier for American companies to do business in Ecuador. Now, Alla from Russia is going to share with us the information about the economic crisis in Russia. Are you there, Alla? Yes, Andrea, I'm here. Thank you very much. As many of you may know, Russia is highly dependent on the export of raw materials. Around 40% of the state's revenues come from the oil and gas sectors. Russia is in an ongoing recession now. Soon I'll tell you what's happening, but let's look back first. In the past 25 years, Russia fought hard and went through a number of crises. The first one happened right after the Soviet Union fell in 1992. It was the hardest time for our country. There was a big mess during the change from the Soviet regime to a market economy. In 1998, Russia experienced a financial crash due to ineffective reforms that led to a weak economy and huge internal and external debts. On top of that, oil prices dropped as a result of the Asian crisis. Russia suffered this crisis with huge consequences, including a strong currency devaluation and a default on domestic debt. Then, 10 years later, in 2008, the world's financial crisis happened. It was a dramatic time for all countries, including Russia. Oil prices collapsed again. Significant capital was withdrawn from Russia. However, the Russian economy was strong enough to recover quickly from that crisis. Now, let's move to the current crisis. The Russian economy has been in a downturn since 2014. Oil prices dropped twice and negatively affected the ruble, which has lost about 50% of its value against the dollar in this period. This is nothing new to It is nothing new to see the ruble falling down, but this time oil prices are not the only reason. But this time, oil prices are not the only reason. Russia also failed to diversify its economy. It is corrupt and has weak institutions. Moreover, the country is still under sanctions by the United States and Europe as a result of the Crimea situation. All these reasons have had a strong effect on the current economic situation. So the result in Russia now is the biggest decline in household incomes over the last 15 years, as well as rising poverty levels. The forecasts are unfavorable. Analysts are expecting a massive decline in living standards. In 2016, the standard of living will return to 2005 levels. According to the forecast, in the near future, 30 to 50% of the population may become poor. This is Alla Levina in Moscow, Russia. Thank you, Alla. Now to close our program, permit Mike to conclude. Hi, everybody. This is ABB News, and we were learning about the Great Depression in 1929, how it affected the entire world, and we compared how the world economy sank into the Great Recession less than a decade ago to create the deepest and most widespread downturns since the Great Depression of the 1930s. A fragile and uneven economic recovery has started. Some countries have grown continuously since the end of 2008, like the USA and China. Some economies, like those of Italy and Greece, however, have shrunk with their gross domestic product declining. Their recovery continues to look weak. I would mention that depression and recession are parts of a normal business cycle. There are both sustained long-term downturns I think that should be as well. There are both sustained long-term downturns as well as upturns in economic activity. However, let's try that again. There are both sustained long-term downturns as well as upturns in economic activity. Hopefully, the world economy will enter the next phase of a business cycle soon and become more stable. Remember to stay tuned to ABB TV News for all the news and the best analysis. Thanks.